My name is Lucas. I'm the head of partnerships at Versori. We also have George here, the head of growth. And we have Phil from Marketplace. Phil, would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Hi, good to meet you. It's Phil Boyle here from Marketplace. I've been with the business up to a couple of years, and I lead the partnerships for Marketplace in the EU, across Europe and the UK.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining. It's actually cool to mention having partners in our partnership in Pints that we partner ourselves with. We're still in the beginning phases of the partnership, but we actually just had before this call a pretty good session where we kind of defined how we can approach a partnership in certain new angles.
Yeah.
Especially in the space that you work in a large global company focused on e-commerce. One interesting point would be with the kind of companies that you work with. If you can name a couple, great. If not, I think most people understand in what space Marketplace is in. You have long sales cycles. When you build partnerships or think about your partnership ecosystem in your entire org, how can they benefit in the end, maybe the sales team, how can they benefit the product team, or in general, the entire organization?
Yeah, it's a really good question. For me, the way I take it, and if we look at the way I would try to build partnerships and ecosystem, is to strengthen the offering that we have when we go to market. So it's not necessarily taking weak points, but it's taking areas where you can enhance what you've got already, possibly fill some gaps if it is something you're moving into a new sector that you're not particularly strong in, and you know you can partner with a solution or a provider that works strong in that market sector. You can support each other and go to market. If we look at some of the customers we work with, well-known home brands that you'd see, especially in the UK, is Tesco's, which is a flagship client for us. And then being Australian born and bred, we've got businesses like Qantas and Woolworths that we work with on the other side of the world. For me, it's just building out an ecosystem of partnerships to work with solutions and providers, implementation partners as well, that can really take our solution and bring it to life.
Was there a certain sector that you focused on first? Like you first thought about how can we shorten sales cycles? Did you focus on the product side first? As you said, can we have a fast implementation time or resellers? Was there a certain part you focused on first when you joined Marketplace?
Yeah, our heritage has been retail. So we've grown up in the retail space and started as a retail business, and then the technology spun out of that into Marketplace. So the heritage has come from that. So understanding the retail space has been a strength. And as we've moved over the last couple of years into a little bit more of the B2B space, it's been a learning curve for us. And then that's where we found solutions that are very strong in the B2B space that we're now partnering with to enhance what we're doing. And I think that also brings in different types of technologies in the ecosystem of the customer that you're working with. What's their architecture they're working with? And therefore, how do we connect to those other systems as well and pass data backwards and forwards? And this is where obviously Versori can really play a strong partnership role for us, because we'll be talking to systems that maybe in the retail space we haven't had to up until now. So I think you're right. It can take a while for a business to decide to launch a marketplace. And then, of course, upon the decision of actually wanting to do a marketplace or a range extension program or even a dropship program, it then entails the project of putting it in and in connecting the systems together. And once those systems are connected together, then there's the added piece of getting that third-party product data, finding those sellers, finding those suppliers, or even if you found them, how do I get them connected and bring in that enriched data and onboard those? So you've got multiple stages to a project, from conception to decision to production and go live. It continues onwards from that, even though the customer or prospect at that time is thinking about the types of products. So once they start to launch and see what customers do want to work with, it can often change. And so it can be important to sit with the customer at the early stages, take on some of their concerns, and then say, actually, we've got a solution or a partner that can help us solve that problem, whether it's an e-com provider, whether it's a payment provider, whether it's a customer service tool. These are all the elements that people are thinking about through the journey of becoming a marketplace or wanting to do a dropship program. Therefore, that's where the partner ecosystem is really strong for us.
You mentioned Woolworths, which if you're from the UK is like good old nostalgia, was a big part of the high street growing up. After high school, we went and got our sweets and candy kind of and fizzy drinks when we were kids. It illustrates a great story about kind of the evolution. We went from e-commerce coming on, that becoming a big thing that disrupted a lot of retailers. Then everybody went to marketplaces, and everybody wanted to build some form of marketplace. All these marketplaces are now connected with DoorDash and Uber and these last mile delivery companies. The evolution of the last 10 years has been quite rapid compared to how quickly these big retailers move. How do you see the next 5 years playing out, particularly in terms of AI we were talking literally right before this about the fact that Shopify has agreed to partner with OpenAI because they want to be the company that's listed top of every OpenAI recommendation now that people are using OpenAI to shop and to buy things. Where do you see, how do you see the retail landscape changing over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think for me personally, as AI becomes more used, people become more comfortable with it, if it's not going to be like Terminator. People will start to use that and are more popularly use it for searching and finding things. I used it myself the other day as almost a test, as like looking for a hotel. The usual thing would have been gone to Google or gone to Google Maps and typed in your location of where you want to be and then find hotels in the area because it has that filter functionality built into it already. I thought, you know what, I'll test it on ChatGPT and see what that comes back with. And the results were pretty good. And of course, the links are there, you click through. So the piece that was missing, and I'm not saying that Google necessarily does this, but because you then click through to the website, you'll then continue on your purchase journey if you decide to buy from them. So I can see why Shopify are looking at this, because the piece at the moment that's missing is almost that checkout when I'm going to one of those search tools. I think it'll just become better at gluing stuff together. Often if people are booking a holiday and there's multiple things you need to get, or that you're buying certain products that you need to go to multiple locations to get it, which is where the likes of Amazon and Walmart's marketplace have done so well, because they brought all the products into one place and made that purchase journey easy. But sometimes you need specialist items, so you'll have to buy from certain places. And I think then the AI will just bring it together, and then there will be a checkout at the back of it. And then once that checkout happens, you can almost see that those orders, like in a marketplace model, will just get filtered out to the separated retail, will package them up and then ship them out. So you'll almost bypass that web interface piece at some point. I think it'll move quite quick towards that. But people who are used to using a website and seeing the brand name of the company they're buying from will still go through the slightly more elongated journey of buying something until you're more comfortable with putting your payment details into an AI tool.
I think I was thinking the other day, like we were at a friend's house and their parents were looking through the fridge and they were out of milk, and they go, "Hey Google, can you add milk to my shopping list?" And so you can like do that piece. OpenAI has now got to the point in their chat interface, you can ask a recommendation, it will bring it up, you can click it, you can buy it very quickly. But as you said, I want a specific brand of this milk, and I want to be able to pick the options. The bit that the retailer still serves is providing that optionality through the marketplace.
Yeah.
Anybody's figured out how that looks in an AI interface yet?
Yeah, it was interesting at an event I went to last week, listening to someone talking. They're working on not just what they think you want, it's what you want at that particular time and how you're feeling. If I'm purchasing some food, it might be for convenience, but actually the mood I'm in at the same time might be the type of food that I want to buy. So it's getting segmented down even further, which is really quite interesting, because you think about that yourself. How is an AI model going to start to learn that if it really does want to get quite as that almost like personal assistant? I'm going to help you do something. I kind of know what you've typically bought beforehand, so I'm going to make these suggestions. But actually, what type of mood am I in at the moment may determine what I want to buy right now. It's like listening to music, isn't it? You don't always listen to the same music all the time. I'm thinking, I fancy something that might be a bit more lively or a bit more calm or a bit more somber. So it's based on the mood you're in. It's a bit like when someone says to you, I don't know if you've ever had this, we're off to do a corporate event or we're going out for an evening. Can you choose what you want to eat before you go? But it's 3 weeks away. And you're thinking, I don't know what I want to eat in 3 weeks' time. When I get to the evening, I might not want that particular dish. I might want one of those other pieces of dish. And it's kind of almost like, you can't necessarily pick it because you need to know what mood you'll be in and how you feel at that particular time, how hungry you are.
That is an interesting point. You personally get groceries, for example, online. And it comes from a local store here, but it's just easier and convenient. And of course, by now, the weekly purchases are almost the same. It almost suggests the entire thing every single time. Maybe if I want to do a certain new dish, I need something specific. But of course, the system learns what you always buy, when you buy it. I don't know, coffee out every 8 days, for example. So I think if the customer or we as the end users are confident that information will be potentially shared in the future with AI models. I mean, we can already share so much data anyway in the internet, so I think most end users don't have a problem with that. That will shape, and as you said, combining that with the feeling you're in, then I think you have a strong case there.
Yeah, it is a strange one when you think of that, especially with GDPR and all the regulations about data protection and cookies and not wanting stuff to follow. I had this conversation with someone last week, how you're saying something in a conversation like this, and your phone is clearly listening, because when you go to look at some social media account, that said thing is actually showing, and you hadn't even typed it in anywhere. You're like, it's definitely listening. And people used to say, don't put an Alexa in your room because it's listening to you. It's all listening to you. I've even got a Google TV, like many people have, and I've said stuff, and then the first film in the list is the one you were talking about. You're like, that's a bit creepy. So there is an element of that creepiness, almost like the phase of when I'd be walking past a certain brand store that I've got an app for, and it knows me and it sends an offer to the phone to go in the store. And people are like, wow, that's a bit creepy. Or I saw that one, it was years ago, it was like a wine shelf. And you'd go into a wine store with all the different reds and whites and all the different kind of regions and countries, etc. And then it would know it was me. And then a light would come up round certain bottles of wine, knowing the choices I've taken. I remember someone presenting it. I think maybe even SAP were doing it. And then it was just a demonstration with the lights. It was the theory behind the model. And then people were like, it's convenient, but I don't really want you to know what wine I like. But I'd happily tell either of you, if I was in a store, to allow the person to make the recommendation. But telling a machine starts to get quite scary. So you're right. How much do we really want to let go and let the AI models understand that fear that they'll be a better wine sommelier than a wine sommelier?
You've been in partnerships for quite some time. You were at BigCommerce before.
Yep.
Right? How, like, as you work with these big retailers, they have very long buying cycles. Strategically, they take a long time to make decisions, but just the scale they operate on. And I feel like particularly their brand, like one blunder can have a multi-year impact for them. As the marketplace technology, you're very core to their tech stack. How much of your role is acting as a mediator between solutions adjacent to the marketplace and the retailer themselves? Because in our head, it's like you can almost drive that strategic conversation that the retailer's having, in the sense that you can recommend solutions that sit adjacent to your marketplace, that continue to enhance your marketplace software, and that ensure that the retailer keeps up to speed with all the changes in buying behavior that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's still a challenge being a software vendor, of getting the hearts and minds of the leadership within a large retailer as taking your advice on a consultative level.
Yeah.
We obviously make our profitability by selling our solution, and by customers using the solution more effectively means that more revenue goes through our platform. There can sometimes be an element of, you're only saying that because you want us to have your platform. But we've had a lot of experience working with retailers, knowing what does and doesn't work, and knowing whether it's the right time and situation for that particular business. I think that's the same for a lot of technology providers. They've had a lot of experience, because that's what we do every day. Talking about other types of partners that we work with on the implementation side, who also implement different platforms, and more often than a marketplace solution. They have a larger team that specializes in it, but we do it every day. We think that everyone should be a marketplace, or should do a range extension program. It makes so much sense when you've got one of the richest men in the world running a business that's grown from a bookstore into one of the largest businesses in the world, has come from working with third-party solutions. So I think we can offer a lot to people, but I think we also need to partner with consulting firms, with the likes of the BCGs and the KPMGs and the Accentures and the Deloittes, and because that's who people do turn to get that kind of strategic advice in that sort of space. And so I think, again, from an ecosystem perspective, it's important for us to be working alongside those businesses, for them to understand our solution and technology, but for them to also understand what's required to move into the arena we're working in. But yes, we work hand in hand and offer that advice, but I think it gets backed up very well from someone who's maybe seen as more of the trusted advisor.
I get that point. We're coming closely up on time, but I will have a last 30 seconds question. If you would have to give advice to someone, maybe someone's out there that's interested in partnership and alliances, what would be for you a good advice if someone would start from scratch or starting in a new org?
Yeah, I think moving into a role within this particular space is very much suited to people that are good at building long-term relationships. What you do now may come around in another 3 or 4 years. It may come around another 10 or 15 years if you're still in the game. Yeah. So I've always taken it as building friendships is something that will last a long time. So even if you're not doing something immediately now that's adding a load of impact, could come along later. It's building the network, a good set of relationships, business friends that you can rely on, trust, and that you can pass and share information, because as we're all trying to build and grow ourselves in certain areas against whatever we need to do within our particular role. So if you can do it alongside like-minded people that have that same kind of ideology that you have and kind of want to enjoy what you're doing, then it's all about building that relationship and trust for a long-term game.
Yeah, I agree. I think partnerships it's definitely a long-term investment, right? From the investment perspective. And it's also a big part of strategy, like sitting down with your partner's business and seeing how you work together and finding a combined strategy where both have value. I remember the first time George and I introduced that to our CEO. Of course, showing the return on investment took a couple of months. But in the end, it paid out. And then I think after 6 months, we stepped down on that strategy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I've sat down with some business before knowing that there's something there, but not quite managing to work out what that value proposition is. I know we can connect our two solutions together, for example, and they'll pass data, but what's that actually bringing to the end user? And then once you've worked out that value proposition, and as you say, that you don't know how long that period is going to be. It could be within the first couple of months. It could take you 6 months. And you have to work at that relationship. And sometimes you'll work at a relationship and then both agree that there isn't a great value proposition, even if you do get on with people. But again, you've built a relationship, which then might also be an introduction into something else further down the line. So I think that's the other important part. It might not be immediately between you, but as companies both have ecosystems, it could be me connected with someone in your ecosystem or you connected to someone in my ecosystem that also brings benefit.
Yeah,